introduce Mellisa here, just so we can kind of keep things rolling along. So Mellisa Orouke will be the second presenter of this particular hour presentation. Mellisa Orouke is an attorney and farm and agribusiness management specialist for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Mellisa has practiced extensively in the fields of business and estate planning, employment, legal issues, and agricultural commercial litigation. She has worked with numerous farm and ranch families to facilitate planning for management of their farm business of all sizes, from small part-time operations to large full-scale commercial farms. Mellissa's particular areas of interest include farm succession planning, agricultural, human resource, legal, and management issues, farmland leasing and tenure arrangements, and working with beginning and transitioning farmers. Melissa's work with the Iowa State University combines her background in education, agriculture, and law as she informs and advises members of the farm and agribusiness community on an expansive array of business planning and legal topics. So again, we certainly welcome both of our speakers, and we would like to allocate at least 10 minutes at the end of their presentations, for general questions. So with that, Beth, you've got the floor.
Thank you. All right, thanks for everyone coming. This is the book. I'm just going to actually read from it as a way of kind of introduction to this topic. The book is my personal story of moving, just as was just said, from San Francisco to Iowa. We're in our 4th year of farming this year. But it uses my story to tell the bigger story about agriculture in America, and with a real economic lens. So I had felt before I wrote the book that there were a few big gaps in the reporting of agriculture. One of them was the economic side of things. So especially in reporting on sustainability, it would be like, oh, here's this great thing this farm's doing, and here's this great thing, but not really like, well, can you make a living at that? Is it actually a viable thing to do on your farm? And I also felt that farmers were kind of portrayed, especially when coming from the Bay Area, the coast. I grew up in New York, outside of New York City. I had really felt like farmers weren't really spoken about like with any kind of empathy or real understanding about farmers. And so I really felt like there was a gap in the literature, so to speak, that I could fill by bringing in a perspective that's saying farmers aren't just uneducated, people are not just like, the minions of big business. There's real reasons why people do what they do. And so I really wanted to make that clear. So I'm just going to read about 2-ish pages to give you a flavor of the book, but also kind of use it as a jumping off place here. All right, so this is a chapter about us growing oats. And the chapter before it talks about us going to the seed store and talking about everything. And so here we are. About a month later, John, my husband, began the arduous seeding process, broadcasting the seed while the ground was still covered with snow. Miraculously, the oats did all they were supposed to do, ecologically speaking. They germinated earlier than their weed enemies, their little green shoots bursting through the soil, growing faster than the grasses. By May, at the end of the oat plant's short life, the fields had turned golden brown as the oats dried. The guy who was to combine them for us was excited. The spring had been cool and wet, he said, ideal for growing oats. Maybe the neighbor was right. Perhaps we could grow great oats in southern Iowa. But the cool and the wet had a downside too. The oats were not drying as fast as they needed to, and the grass, clover, and alfalfa were beginning to catch up, which would make harvesting the oats much more difficult. Then the wind came. A storm was fast approaching, clouds stretching to the ground like a black veil traveling towards us from the not-so-far distance. We all stood on Andrea's porch, a very Iowa thing to do in a storm, as the wall of cold air enveloped us, the bushes in front of the house bending horizontally as if hit by a wave. Suddenly, the top of a 40-foot tall, dead-standing tree snapped and crashed to the ground not far away. My sister-in-law, a normally cool and calm Iowan, unfazed by extreme weather, hung her head out from the side of the porch to get a better view of the open fields to the north. "Okay, let's get into the basement," she stated matter-of-factly, the first time in all my summers on the farm that anyone had ever gotten nervous about the possibility of a tornado. The 5 of us headed down. Even the dogs who had never come into the house were carried down the stairs. The rain hit the windows as if someone had turned a hose on full force. The sound against the siding as if someone had turned up the volume to 11. Then, as quickly as the faucet had turned on, it switched off, and we all immediately went outside to see the damage. Few trees down, branches everywhere, but no tornado, no houses flattened. That night, the men did what men do and talked about how they never thought the storm was that big of a deal, how they had all seen so much worse in their lives, how they couldn't believe we had actually gone into the basement like a parade of weenies. But the oats had not fared so well. Many of the plants were now lying flat. Days passed as we waited for the ground to dry out again, the other grasses getting taller every hour. Suddenly, we were faced with the question of whether we should bother to harvest them. The combine guy had tested a patch a few days later. Everyone's bubble now burst by the actual low yield of 25 bushels per acre, which barely filled the back of the grain truck. I climbed up the steep ladder into the bin and collected a baggie full of the oats. The smell strong like fresh bread, but greener. The closest grain elevator is about 10 miles away, a collection of metal silos and a red building with a truck scale outside for weighing the corn and soybeans that usually were hauled to the facility by the semi. "Oats?" the woman behind the counter asked politely. She took the sample bag as she would with any farmer's grain and put it into the machine to test the water content and weight of the seed, the telltale signs of whether a grain would garner the highest price. "It's not really working," she apologized after a few minutes. "We don't really ever weigh grains," she said. The owner was called. After a bit of fumbling around with the machine, a verdict was announced. The oats were still too wet and did not weigh enough for them to consider buying. "We're having a harder and harder time selling oats from down here in southern Iowa," the owner told me. "We just can't compete with Canada and the northern states," he added, "where oat seeds grow larger and heavier." Was there another crop besides corn or beans we could grow and sell them in this part of the world? Would his company buy something else? "Not really," he stated matter-of-factly. "You might think about growing rye, I guess. You could sell rye seed to other farmers for cover crops." I asked whether he had heard of kernza, a perennial getting a lot of attention in places like San Francisco, because it produces a seed good for bread or cereal, but doesn't need to be planted and harvested every year like corn. He looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "No," was all he said. Okay, so that was chapter 4. All right, so why talk about oats? Why read this? There's lots of lessons to be learned from a story like this, I hope, which is why it's in the book and why I'm talking to you about it today. So one of which is just that farming is inherently risky, which is nothing new to any of you all. You all know this very well. And there's so many good reasons to stick with the status quo, to do what you've always done, what your family has always done. There's government support of this system that goes on today. There's cultural support. Most of your neighbors are doing the same thing that your farm is doing, and it's part of the culture to grow corn and soybeans, for example. There's logistical support. You just can go to that seed dealer and it's all right there. Whatever you need is available. It's right there in your area. And there's technical support. So if you're wondering how to grow something, it's pretty easy to find somebody who can help you figure that out. But there are a lot of good reasons not to stick with the status quo. And these are just a few here. Corn and beans are also really risky. People, the last decade has been really low prices. And, I like Angie's very upbeat about it, as if when things are bad, we know they're going to get good. But when they're good, we also know it's going to get bad. And I hate to kind of, talk about the flip side of that, but it's bad more than it's good. Which if you look at the price of corn, it goes, and the prices of your inputs kind of keep going up. we're also kind of not meeting this mandate, this mission that we love to talk about in agriculture, feeding the world. More than 50% of corn is now going to ethanol. So there's some good reasons to think about how can we feed the world? And like someone asked this morning, how can we feed the world more nutritious food perhaps as well? And we all kind of are aware of there's environmental drawbacks, nutritional drawbacks. That's kind of, the science is catching up with that too, that as we've pushed for higher yield, the actual nutritional value of our food has decreased. And there's really good science showing that now. And of course our social structure, rural towns have suffered in many ways. So I want to talk about kind of 5 principles that are illustrated by this oats story about ways that we can change the status quo. We can, even if it's just a smaller thing like cover crops. I'm thinking about putting in cover crops to my farm. Why do that, and how we can make that process be easier for ourselves. So first of all, choosing products that are best for your area, right? This is like maybe something that we should have thought about before going into oats. We were hopeful listening to our neighbor who said that he sold his oats. I had also just been, as a journalist, I had been invited to a what do you call it, energy bar company, and they were talking about how they desperately needed organic grains, American grown organic grains, and if farmers would just grow them. So we got really caught up in all of that and excited about it. There's also, there's this place called Pie Ranch outside of San Francisco, and they did a similar thing where these people bought it, they were super excited. They were going to make everything that you needed to make pies. They were going to raise it right there on this land, and so the pie would be completely local. And then they figured out you can't grow wheat in California. And it's like, no, that's not the system of operations here. Like, let's figure out, talk to experts. There's a lot of information out there. Your extension people should be able to help. And just, what's that small thing? Like, we want to add something to our rotation with corn and beans. What are some actual options for doing that maybe we can make some money? Things like rye, not only for seed, but to make rye whiskey. That's becoming a thing, is like local grains that are being distilled. Barley, you can fit those things into your production cycle and still not be compromising your economic viability. And then common sense, of course, which Pie Ranch didn't necessarily do. There's also the concept of just looking around for markets, like what is not available here that you wish you could buy. And there's lots of vegetables out there that fit this category. Lots of opportunities for Iowa-grown products, that people want to buy local products. There's just, somebody was saying this morning, if there's an economic opportunity to do something, we should be moving into that direction. So I'm on the board of the Iowa Food Co-op, for example, and groups like that creating more opportunities for people to buy directly from farmers, it just changes that game. So I just checked this data yesterday with the USDA. As we go, as consumers, we buy at the supermarket. For every dollar you spend, 16 cents is going to the farmer. And there's a qualification of that 16 cents too. 8 cents of that is going out the door in inputs. So if you are selling a commodity, growing and selling a commodity, you are making 8 cents on the dollar. The corporate entities, the people who are marketing it and boxing it, are the ones who are making, 92% of the profits on that box of cereal. If you think about, a bushel of corn compared to a box of cornflakes, those are similarly priced, 52 pounds of corn and a box of cornflakes, right? So we're losing a lot of the money that we could be bringing in. And through things like the food co-op or selling directly, we can recoup some of that profit there. There's lots of opportunities. Veggies and greenhouses, like greenhouses have not been a ginormous thing in Iowa yet. There's a lot of opportunity. People are looking for locally grown produce in the winter. So that's a great opportunity there. Mushrooms, like we forage mushrooms. We are certified by the state. There's something like 8 mushrooms that we can pick and sell. This year, it has not rained much, but like last year, we had hundreds of pounds of chanterelles on the farm, just growing. That's free money, really. Chestnuts, another huge market. Goats as well. We have goats on the farm. They do a lot of ecological services. You can also rent them out. And to do that with your neighbors, everyone's going to want to have something come over and eat some honeysuckle and some multiflora rose. Everyone in the state would like that service. And then for meat, basically white Americans are the only ones in the world who don't eat goat. It's the most sold, most eaten meat in the world.
Most delicious.
Most delicious. So there's a market, and there's apparently also, like in Australia, I think it is where most of the goats for export have been raised. And if you watch the news, they are also having climate problems and massive problems with drought. So there's an availability. So if you're looking for those markets, that's a potential. Working with others. This is also something that I would encourage you if you're thinking about doing something a little bit different even. There's a lot of possibilities out there. So Kernza, as I mentioned in the book, it's a perennial crop. It's a fascinating thing where they've actually patented the seed. So when you purchase the seed, and there's like cooperatives now that have sprung up to do this, where you get the seed and you get that technical expertise and you get that marketing potential. That's something we can do as groups. You can't do that really alone. So there's that co-op is in Minnesota. It's called Perennial Promise, and it's with the University of Minnesota, the Land Institute, who have created Kernza. 99 Counties is a new company here in Iowa, run by Nick Wallace, who was also a livestock farmer, and he's created this company to source pasture-raised animals from all 99 counties to sell in Chicago and Omaha, places with larger population density. So again, as a group, we can get together and do that and then make more viability for people wanting to pasture raise animals. As we do it, if we all do it one by one, then we lose some of that potential marketing power. And of course, Practical Farmers of Iowa, just farmer to farmer sharing, getting information from people how to do things, super valuable. And going slow. So we were lucky. We did not put all of our land into oats. We didn't pour lots of money into it. We just were going slowly. We didn't break the bank. And then you can also see, okay, these changes that I really like do I want to be doing this with my time? Because we have to remember that at the end of the day, this is your job, obviously. And if I don't much like working with goats, well, I probably shouldn't be going down that road. So starting slow with a little bit of at a time will give you that opportunity to learn. And taking care of yourself. I can't stress this enough, and I put a whole chapter in the book about it. It's probably one of the chapters I've gotten the most feedback about, because as farmers, we don't talk about this aspect. Especially people who want to go into sustainable agriculture, we have all this mythology around, feeding nourishing food to our communities, and we're going to save the planet and steward the environment. And then at the end of the day, if you're working 14 hours every day, you can't sustain that over the long term. That's a 3-year hobby. That's not going to be a lifelong career. So taking care of yourself throughout all of this change is really important. It cannot be sustainable if it does not sustain us. And it became one of these big light bulb moments for myself in thinking and talking about regenerative agriculture. We're going to take care of the land. We're going to regenerate this environment. We're going to make it as similar to nature as possible. Well, it can't work without generations of humans that are part of it. So we have to be nurturing ourselves and the community that we work in order to make that possible. All right, so that's the little blip about the book. This is our farm, Whippoorwill Creek Farm. That's our website. It's just iowa-farm.com. We have a blog. We do all those kinds of things marketing-wise and sell our beef. So Mellisa will talk, and then we'll leave some time for questions.
Okay. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good. I would like to ask you folks, while I'm switching some slides here,